No one warns you that loneliness makes the walls of your apartment feel like they are listening. I thought I was fine. I thought I liked the silence until he walked in and shattered it, simply by existing a floor above me. I run a coffee shop in a quiet street of Portland, Oregon. It's not the kind of place people stumble upon by accident. You only end up here if you need to breathe. The shop smells of roasted beans and cinnamon, always half busy, always half empty, much like me. Then one rainy afternoon, a stranger with dark hair dripping water down his collar walked into my shop. He didn't order coffee right away. He looked around, as though mapping the room, until his eyes landed on the staircase in the corner, the one that leads to the little apartment above. "Is that place for rent?" he asked, voice low, cautious, as if words themselves were fragile things that might shatter if spoken too loudly. It was. And just like that, the upstairs room that had sat empty for months no longer belonged to the silent site, belonged to him. His name was Aaron. He carried his life in a few battered suitcases and a notebook he never let go of. Some nights I would see his shadow moving across the window upstairs, writing, rewriting, tearing out pages only to start again. I told myself I didn't care, that tenants come and go. But the truth? From the moment he moved in, the air shifted. The silence wasn't mine, Anna Maria, it was ours. First, he was a mystery. He rarely spoke beyond a polite thank you when I slid a cup of coffee across the counter. He always paid in cash, and his hands trembled just slightly as he counted the bills. His eyes, though God, his eyes, they carried storms, and every time he glanced at me, I felt like I was drowning and breathing for the first time all at once. I told myself to stay away. I'd had enough of broken promises and boys who disappeared when the world got too heavy. But Aaron wasn't the kind of storm you could ignore. He seeped in quietly, until even my dreams started smelling like rain and ink-stained paper. One night, close to midnight, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. I was still cleaning tables, humming to the low jazz spilling from the speakers. He stood there, notebook pressed against his chest like a shield. "Do you ever feel," he said, voice rough like he hadn't spoken in hours, "like your life doesn't belong to you anymore?" The question hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Because yes, I had felt that. Every damn day. Running the shop wasn't a dream, it was survival. Smiling at customers, brewing lattes, pretending I didn't care that no one really knew might was all survival. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I poured him a cup of coffee and slid it across. "Sit," I said softly. That was the first night we talked. He told me he used to write for magazines in New York, that he left everything behind without saying goodbye, that sometimes he woke up and didn't know who he was supposed to be anymore. He didn't explain why, and I didn't push. I just listened. For hours. And maybe, in that silence between us, something new began. Days turned into weeks. Aaron became part of the rhythm of my shop. Sometimes he'd sit by the window, scribbling in his notebook while sipping coffee I refused to let him pay for. Other times, he'd stay upstairs for days, curtains drawn, as if the world outside was too much. But then came the morning he walked in with a story. Not in words, not in the notebook, but in his smile. A real one. Small, hesitant, but alive. I almost spilled an entire pot of coffee just staring at him. "You okay?" I asked. He shrugged. "I'm writing again." And I swear, the room felt brighter. Still, it wasn't all light. There were nights I heard him crying through the thin ceiling. Nights he left without a word, returning at dawn with exhaustion painted across his face. I wanted to reach out, to hold him, but fear kept me rooted. Fear that if I touched him, he would break, or worse, would vanish. The breaking point came on a stormy Friday. The shop was empty, rain slamming against the windows. He walked in, drenched, shaking, his notebook clutched so tightly his knuckles were white. "I can't do this," he whispered. I froze. "Do what?" "Be here. Pretend I'm okay. Pretend I'm not broken." His voice cracked on the last word. He dropped the notebook onto the counter, pages spilling open. I saw words scrawled in desperation, half-crossed-out sentences, fragments of pain. And then, before I could stop myself, I stepped around the counter and pulled him into my arms. He stiffened at first, trembling, like touch was foreign to him. Then slowly he melted, burying his face against my shoulder. And in that fragile, trembling closeness, something unspoken passed between us, a thing that felt like both breaking and healing at the same time. I didn't let go. Not even when the lights flickered. Not even when the storm outside howled louder than his sobs. Because in that moment, I realized I didn't want to be alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, neither did he. The storm passed, but something in us remained cracked open. After that night, Aaron didn't disappear into silence the way he used to. He lingered. Sometimes he'd sit on the counter while I closed up shop, teasing me about how seriously I took latte art. Other nights, he'd read parts of his writing to minute the finished sentences. Not the polished essays, but the raw pieces. Sentences that bled. Words that hurt. I learned his wounds were deep. A relationship in New York that had consumed him until it destroyed him. A career that took everything he gave and spit him out when he was no longer perfect enough. He left because staying meant dying a little more every day. And I told him my truth too. That I never meant to own a coffee shop. That it was my dad's dream, not mine. That after Dad passed, I kept the place alive because it was the only piece of him left. That sometimes, when I locked up at night, I felt like I was living someone else's life. It was strange how confession became connection. How two broken men found pieces of themselves in each other's fractures. But healing isn't linear, and love isn't gentle. One night, he didn't come back. His apartment light stayed dark. I told myself not to panic, that maybe he went for a walk. Maybe he found inspiration at some late-night diner. But when dawn came and his bed was still empty, fear strangled me. Hours later, he stumbled into the shop, eyes bloodshot, smelling of cigarettes and rain. I'd never seen him so hollow. "Don't wait for me," he said, voice hoarse. My chest tightened. "Aaron," he shook his head. "I ruin everything I touch. You don't deserve to get dragged into this mess." He turned to leave, and something inside me snapped. "You don't get to decide what I deserve," I said sharply. "And you don't get to disappear on me. Not again." Not when I choked on the word. Love felt too big, too dangerous, too soon. But it was there, burning at the back of my throat. He froze. His hand lingered on the door, trembling. Then, slowly, he turned back, eyes wet. "You shouldn't love me," he whispered. "I already do," I admitted. The silence after was deafening. For a moment, I thought he would bolt, that he'd vanish into the city and I'd never see him again. But then his shoulders slumped, and he let out a broken laugh. "You're insane," he said. "Maybe," I answered, "but you're here, and so am I, and maybe that's enough." He stayed. Not just that night. Not just the next week. He stayed in the small apartment above my shop, in the quiet rhythm of coffee mornings and midnight confessions. He stayed through the laughter and the arguments, through the days when he couldn't get out of bed and the nights when I sat beside him, reading his half-finished pages until he fell asleep. And slowly, staying turned into living. One evening, months later, he handed me his notebook. Not the messy scraps, not the torn-out pages, but something whole. A story. Ours. I read about the boy who ran a coffee shop because he couldn't let go of the past. About the writer who moved in above and discovered the future wasn't as terrifying as he thought. About two men who weren't saved by each other, but who chose to walk through the fire together. When I finished, I looked up at him. His eyes were shining, nervous and hopeful all at once. "Well?" he asked. I smiled. "It's beautiful. You're beautiful." He laughed, shaking his head. "You're biased." "Maybe," I said, leaning in, brushing my hand against his. "But I'm also right." We kissed then, not the desperate kind we had shared in shadows, but a slow, steady kiss that tasted like promises. Life didn't become perfect. The coffee machine still broke down twice a week. Customers still complained about Wi-Fi speeds. Aaron still had nights when the weight of his past tried to crush him. And I still carried the ache of dreams I never chased. But now we weren't alone. Sometimes, after closing the shop, we'd sit upstairs with the window open, the city humming below. He'd read while I leaned against him, both of us wrapped in the quiet kind of love that doesn't need grand gestures. One night, he whispered, "You know you saved me, right?" I shook my head. No, we saved each other. And maybe that was the truth. Two broken lives colliding, rewriting themselves line by line, page by page. When I look back now, I realize the story was never just about him moving in. It was about what happens when you let someone close enough to see the cracks. When you stop pretending you don't need anyone. When you dare to believe that love, messy and terrifying as it is, might just be worth it. So Yesha moved into the apartment above my coffee shop. And Yesha started quietly rewriting my life. But the ending, that's ours to write. And for the first time, I'm not afraid of how the story goes. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.